Hello, everybody, and how are you? I'm just going to adjust my camera again. Almost. That'll do. Sorry, itchy ear, and it is rather warm here at the moment. I know it's not hot compared with, say, somewhere like Australia, Northern Australia, like New South Wales and places like that, or places nearer to the equator, like Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands, and other places too, like North Africa. But it's pretty warm here for us. So if you see me getting a little bit flustered, it may well be because it's a bit too warm here. So where are we up to with the story that we've currently got going? We've just had, I do have my book here unlocked. We've just had a chapter where the children were finally rescued from the top of the church tower after having had wings, and then they fell asleep on the church tower roof, and then their wings disappeared because of the fact that that's what happens with their wishes. We're reading 5 Children in It, by the way, which is why I'm giving you this explanation of what's going on. And the children had eventually got home, and they were in trouble for being out for so long. And so I'm just going to read the last couple of paragraphs from the end of it because they actually flow into the next chapter. Martha was obliged to stick to what she had said the night before about keeping the children indoors the next day for a punishment, but she wasn't at all ugly about it and agreed to let Robert go out for half an hour to get something he particularly wanted. This, of course, was the day's wish, because they only get one wish a day. Robert rushed to the gravel pit, found the Psammead, and presently wished for, but that too is another story. And so today's chapter carries on from there. But first of all, hi, if you're new here, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories because why not? I mean, otherwise nobody knows anything about how the way stories were told before. There's some real gems. We've had some great stories. There's some other ones that, it's like same sort of thing. Anyway, I read old-fashioned children's stories. I started during our first New Zealand lockdown with COVID-19 last year. And I read the sort of stories, well, most of them are actually stories that I read when I was growing up. My parents also read, and even my grandparents read them. I don't tend to chat during a chapter, but between chapters, if there's anyone who's in chat who's been asking questions or talking about anything, or there's anything to talk about, I will often chat between chapters. I will interrupt myself while I'm during a chapter to explain something if I think it's something that most people don't necessarily understand, just because I've been reading these sort of stories for a very long time, and so I'm probably a little bit more familiar with the way a lot of the mechanics of the storytelling of the age, but also actual things they talk about. I'm a lot more familiar with those and I recognise it compared with most people these days. So hey, free explanation. Occasionally I'll get stumped by a word, and I'll actually ask you, the listener, if you've if you're able to, and it's handy to actually look up a word and then just type into chat what the definition is, and so we can have a better understanding of what's going on. Excuse me a minute. Sorry. So that sort of thing. And also I've got ADHD, and I tend to get distracted. I'll get halfway through a sentence sometimes and actually totally lose whereabouts on the page I am. But hey, it's real life. That's fine. So here we go. We are going to start with, after I've had a sip of my coffee, big thank yous to my son who made it for me. Before I actually start reading, we've got a couple of guidelines. The guidelines are: make sure you have something to drink and something to snack on, and the third thing is somewhere comfortable to sit. So it's the first set of guidelines. And the second set of guidelines is if you need to be working or studying or otherwise being physically busy or even mentally busy while you're listening, that's fine. Story time is ideal for lurking. I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I love it. If people want to listen to a story that I'm reading while they're in the middle of doing something else, that's awesome. My reading is less like an audiobook because they're all polished and done perfectly and they edit out all the mistakes and stuff, and much more like bedtime stories. So here we go. 5 Children and It by E. Nesbit. She's the lady who wrote The Railway Children and the Bastable series. That's about 3 children, about 3 books about some children trying to make a fortune and who always get themselves in trouble. The Would-Be-Goods is the first of those books. Well, The Adventures of the Would-Be-Goods. Anyway, so 5 Children in It is a little bit different to that, but that's okay. Same author, same sense of humour, same sense of children getting themselves in trouble when they probably could have avoided it if they'd looked at the situation slightly differently. Anyway, we're going to carry on. 5 Children in It by E. Nesbit, Chapter 6, A Castle and No Dinner. The others were to be kept in as a punishment for the misfortunes of the day before. Of course, Martha thought it was naughtiness and not misfortune, so you must not blame her. She only thought she was doing her duty. You know, grown-up people often say they do not like to punish you and that they only do it for your own good and that it hurts them as much as it hurts you. And this is really very often the truth. Martha certainly hated having to punish the children quite as much as they hated to be punished. For one thing, she knew what a noise there would be in the house all day. And she had other reasons. That's interesting. I wonder if they're going to explain that later on in the story. I declare, she said to the cook, it seems almost a shame to keeping of them indoors this lovely day. But they are that audacious they'll be walking in with their heads knocked off some of these days if I don't put my foot down, because both the children's parents are away at the moment, and so Martha and the cook are in charge of the household and making sure that the children get safely through. Anyway, right. If I don't put my foot down. You make them a cake for tea tomorrow, dear, and we'll have baby along of us soon as we've got a bit forward with our work. Then they can have a good romp with him out of the way. Now, Eliza, come, get on with them beds. Here's 10 o'clock nearly and no rabbits caught. People say that in Kent when they mean and no work done. That's interesting. So all the others were kept in, but Robert, as I have said, was allowed to go out for half an hour to get something they all wanted, and that, of course, was the day's wish. He had no difficulty in finding the sand fairy, for the day was already so hot that it had actually, for the first time, come out of its own accord, and was sitting in a sort of pool of soft sand, stretching itself and trimming its whiskers and turning its snail's eyes round and round. Ha! It said when its left eye saw Robert. I've been looking for you. Where are the rest of you? Not smashed themselves up with those wings, I hope. No, said Robert, but the wings got us into a row, just like all the wishes always do. So the others are kept indoors, and I was only let out for half an hour to get the wish. So please let me wish as quickly as I can. Wish away, said the Samoyed, twisting itself round on the sand. But Robert couldn't wish away. He forgot all the things he had been thinking about, and nothing would come into his head but little things for himself, like candy, a foreign stamp album, or a knife with 3 blades and a corkscrew. He sat down to think better of things the others would not have cared for, such as a football or a pair of leg guards, or to be able to lick Simpkins minor thoroughly when he went back to school. Lick as in beat him up. Beat him in fisticuffs. Well, said the Samoyed at last, you'd better hurry up with that wish of yours. Time flies. I know it does, said Robert. I can't think what to wish for. I wish you could give one of the others their wish without their having to come here to ask for it. Oh, don't! But it was too late. The Samoyed had blown itself out to about 3 times its proper size, and now it collapsed like a pricked bubble, and with a deep sigh leaned back against the edge of the sand pool, quite faint with the effort. There, it said in a weak voice, it was tremendously hard, but I did it. Run along home, or they'll be sure to wish for something silly before you get there. They were quite sure. Robert felt this, and as he ran home his mind was deeply occupied with the sort of wishes he might find they had wished in his absence. They might wish for rabbits, or white mice, or chocolate, or a fine day tomorrow, or even, and that was most likely, someone might have said, "I do wish to goodness Robert would hurry up." Yeah, this is the thing with saying the word wish as a common thing in your speech. It starts to get used in different ways when you have something that will grant your wishes. Well, he was hurrying up, and they would have had their wish, and the day would be wasted. Then he tried to think what they could wish for, something that would be amusing indoors. That had been his own difficulty from the beginning. So few things are amusing indoors when the sun is shining outside and you mayn't go out, however much you want to do so. Robert was running as fast as he could, but when he turned the corner that ought to have brought him within sight of the architect's nightmare, the ornamental ironwork on the top of the house, he opened his eyes so wide that he had to drop into a walk, for you cannot run with your eyes wide open. Then suddenly he stopped short, for there was no house to be seen. The front garden railings were gone too, and where the house had stood, Robert rubbed his eyes and looked again. Yes, the others had wished, there was no doubt about it, and they must have wished that they lived in a castle, for there the castle stood, black and stately, and very tall and broad, with battlements and lancet windows, and 8 great towers, and where the garden and the orchard had been, there were white things dotted like mushrooms. Robert walked slowly on, and as he got nearer he saw that these were tents, and men in armour were walking about among the tents, crowds and crowds of them. And I'm just going to show you a picture. Hang on, just check that I've got the right one. There you go. He's stopped in the middle of the road to find out what it is that the children have wished, and here's the castle instead of the house that they're currently living in. What adventures are they going to have in a castle? What else was part of the wish? There's always something. "Oh," said Robert fervently, they've wished for a castle and it's being besieged." Oops. "It's just like that sand fairy. I wish we'd never seen the beastly thing." At the little window above the great gateway across the moat that now lay where the garden had been but half an hour ago, someone was waving something pale dust-coloured. Robert thought it was one of Cyril's handkerchiefs. They had never been white since the day when he had upset the bottle of combined toning and fixing solution into the drawer where they were, the handkerchiefs. I'm not quite sure what toning and fixing solution are. I think it may be to do with photography. Robert waved back and immediately felt that he had been unwise, for this signal had been seen by the besieging force, and 2 men in steel caps were coming towards him. They had high brown boots on their long legs, and they came towards him with such great strides that Robert remembered the shortness of his own legs and did not run away. He knew it would be useless to himself, and he feared it might be irritating to the foe. So he stood still, and the 2 men seemed quite pleased with him. "By my halidom," said one, "a brave varlet this." Robert felt pleased at being called brave, and somehow it made him feel brave. He passed over the varlet. It was the way people talked in historical romances for the young, he knew, and it was evidently not meant for rudeness. He only hoped he would be able to understand what they said to him. He had not been always able quite to follow the conversations in the historical romances for the young. I'm just going to go and shut that door so it doesn't keep banging. I will be back in a moment. Don't go anywhere. Sorry? No. There. I've propped the door open so we should get a little bit more fresh air and I shouldn't get quite so hot and we can keep on reading. Just another mouthful of coffee. Right, here we go. I better just check what's happening with that picture in case I need to change it for later. Right, carrying on. Here we go. Sorry, I thought I had everything set up. Seriously, I did. Right. He had not been able, or had not been always able, quite to follow the conversations in the historical romances for the young. That's probably the sort of thing that his sisters would read aloud. That sort of thing. And here we carry on. His garb is strange, said the other. Some outlandish treachery belike. Say, lad, what brings thee hither? Robert knew what this meant. Now then, youngster, what are you up to here, eh? So he said. That's basically what it means. If you please, I want to go home. Go then, said the man with the longest boots. None hindereth, and naught lets us to follow. Zooks, he added in a cautious undertone, I misdoubt me, but he beareth tidings to the besieged. Where dwellest thou, young knave? Inquired the man with the largest steel cap. Over there, said Robert, and directly he had said it, he knew he ought to have said yonder. Ha, sayest so? Rejoined the longest boots. Come hither, boy, this is a matter for our leader. And to the leader Robert was dragged forthwith by the reluctant ear. And here I think we have the next picture. So I'm just going to see if I have it right. Yes, I do. And I shall move my chair. And there they are with the big helmets and the high boots. And there's Robert being taken off to meet their leader. The leader was the most glorious creature Robert had ever seen. He was exactly like the pictures Robert had so often admired in the historical romances. He had armour and a helmet. Sorry, burping away here. Armour and a helmet and a horse and a crest and feathers and a shield and a lance and a sword. His armour and his weapons were all, I am almost sure, of quite different periods. That's interesting. Wonder if it's stuff that he's found along the way or if it's something to do with the way they've wished. We'll find out in a minute, won't we? The shield was 13th century, while the sword was that of a pattern used in the Peninsular War. The cuirass was of the time of Charles I, and the helmet dated from the Second Crusade. The arms on the shield were very grand, three red running lions on a blue background. The tents were of the latest brand approved by our modern War Office. And the whole appearance of camp, army and leader might have been a shock to some, but Robert was dumb with admiration, and it all seemed to him perfectly correct, because he knew no more of heraldry or archaeology than the gifted artists who usually drew the pictures for the historical romances. The scene was indeed exactly like a picture. He admired it all so much that he felt braver than ever. I wonder if someone was looking at a picture in a book while they were having to stay indoors, and therefore that was what they were wishing from. "Come hither, lad," said the glorious leader, when the men in Cromwellian steel caps had said a few low, eager words, and he took off his helmet because he could not see properly with it on. He had a kind face and long fair hair. "Have no fear, thou shalt take no scathe," he said. Robert was glad of that. He wondered what scathe was, and if it was nastier than the medicine which he had to take sometimes. "Unfold thy tale without alarm," said the leader kindly. "Whence comest thou, and what is thine intent?" "My what?" said Robert. "What seekest thou to accomplish? What is thine errand that thou wanderest here alone among these rough men-at-arms? Poor child, thy mother's heart aches for thee e'en now, I'll warrant me." "I don't think so," said Robert. "You see, she doesn't know I'm out." The leader wiped away a manly tear, exactly as a leader in a historic romance would have done, and said, so he wiped his hand or the back of his arm across his eyes. Hang on, here's your picture. The leader wiped away a manly tear. He's going like this, except his hand's going this way. He's going like this. And there's Robert. There's one of the guards. And there he is. He's taken off his helmet and he's wiping his eyes. That's the fluff of his helmet that's in his other hand that's hanging out. Anyway, we'll carry on. The leader wiped away a manly tear, exactly as a leader in a historical romance would have done, and said, "Fear not to speak the truth, my child. Thou hast naught to fear from Wulfric de Talbot." Robert had a wild feeling that this glorious leader of the besieging party, being himself part of a wish, would be able to understand better than Martha, or the gypsies, or the policemen in Rochester, or the clergyman of yesterday, the true tale of the wishes and the Psammead. The only difficulty was that he knew he could never remember enough quothas and beshrew me's and things like that to make his talk sound like the talk of a boy in an historical romance. However, he began boldly enough with a sentence straight out of Ralph de Courcy or The Boy Crusader. That's a title of one. He said, "Gramercy for thy courtesy, fair Sir Knight. The fact is, it's like this, and I hope you're not in a hurry, because the story's rather a breather." So he's got schoolboy cant. "Father and mother are away, and when we went down playing in the sand pits, we found a Psammead." "I cry thee mercy, a Psammead," said the knight. Okay, so Psammead that Robert is saying is spelt P-S-A-M-M-E-A-D. And the way the knight is saying it, it's written S-A-M-M-Y-A-D-D. Yes, a sort of fairy or enchanter. Yes, that's it, an enchanter. And he said we could have a wish every day, and we wished first to be beautiful. "Thy wish was scarce granted," muttered one of the men-at-arms, looking at Robert, who went on as if he had not heard, though he thought the remark very rude indeed. That's excellent. I told you she had a little bit of humour. Oh dear. Sorry, I just have to get the next picture lined up in case there's something else coming, and I need to have it ready. You can have a little bit of a chuckle. Thy wish was scarce granted. That's excellent. "And then we wished for money, treasure, you know, but we couldn't spend it. And yesterday we wished for wings, and we got them, and we had a ripping time to begin with." "Thy speech is strange and uncouth," said Sir Wulfric de Talbot. "Repeat thy words. What hadst thou? A ripping, I mean a jolly No, no, we were contented with our lot, that's what I mean, only after we got into an awful fix. What is a fix? A fray, perhaps? Mayhap? No, not a fray, a tight place. A dungeon? Alas for thy youthful fettered limbs, said the knight with polite sympathy. It wasn't a dungeon, we just encountered undeserved misfortunes, Robert explained, and today we are punished by not being allowed to go out. That is where I live. He pointed to the castle. The others are in there and they are not allowed to go out. It is all the enchanter's fault. I wish we'd never seen him. He is an enchanter of might? Oh yes, of might and main, rather. And thou deemest that it is the spells of the enchanter, whom thou hast angered, that have lent strength to the besieging party, said the gallant leader. But know thou that Wulfric de Talbot needs no enchanter's aid to lead his followers to victory. No, I'm sure you don't, said Robert with hasty courtesy. Of course not, you wouldn't, you know, but all the same it's partly his fault. But we're most to blame. You couldn't have done anything if it hadn't been for us. How now, bold boy, asked Sir Wulfric haughtily. Thy speech is dark and eke scarce courteous. Unravel me this riddle. Oh, said Robert desperately, of course you don't know it, but you're not real at all. You're only here because the others must have been idiots enough to wish for a castle, and when the sun sets, you'll just vanish away, and it'll all be right. It'll be all right. The captain and the men-at-arms exchanged glances, at first pitying, and then sterner, as the longest-booted man said, Beware, my noble lord, the urchin doth but feign madness to escape from our clutches. Shall we not bind him? I am no more mad than you are, said Robert angrily. Perhaps not so much, only I was an idiot to think you'd understand anything. Let me go, I haven't done anything to you. Whither? Asked the knight, who seemed to have believed all the enchanter story till it came to his own share in it. Whither wouldst thou wend? Home, of course, said Robert, pointing to the castle. To carry news of succour? Nay. All right then, said Robert, struck by a sudden idea. Then let me go somewhere else. His mind sought eagerly among the memories of the historical romance. Sir Wulfric de Talbot, he said slowly, should think foul scorn to keep a chap, one who has done him no harm, when he wants to cut off quietly, to depart without violence. This to my face, beshrew thee for a knave, replied Sir Wulfric, but the appeal seemed to have gone home. Yet thou sayest sooth, he added thoughtfully, go where thou wilt, sooth being truth. He added nobly, thou art free, Wulfric de Talbot warreth not with babes, and Jacob here shall bear thee company. All right, said Robert wildly, Jacob will enjoy himself, I think. Come on, Jacob, Sir Wulfric, I salute thee. He saluted after the modern military manner, and set off running to the sandpit, Jacob's long boots keeping up easily. He found the fairy, he dug it up, he woke it up, he implored it to give him one more wish. I've done 2 today already, he grumbled, and one was as stiff a bit of work as ever I did. Oh, do, said Robert, while Jacob looked on with an expression of open-mouthed horror at the strange beast that talked and gazed with its snail's eyes at him. And here you have the picture for it. Oh, do, said Robert. There's Robert pleading with the Samiad, with his snail's eyes, looking at Jacob. Jacob's obviously feeling a little puzzled by the whole situation. So there you go. And we'll get the next picture ready, and I shall carry on reading. Well, what is it? Snapped the Samiad with cross sleepiness. I wish I was with the others, said Robert, and the Samiad began to swell. Robert never thought of wishing the castle and the siege away. Of course he knew they had all come out of a wish, but swords and daggers and pikes and lances seemed much too real to be wished away. Robert lost consciousness for an instant. When he opened his eyes, the others were crowding round him. "We never heard you come in," they said. "How awfully jolly of you to wish it to give us our wish. Of course we understood that was what you'd done, but you ought to have told us. Suppose we'd wished something silly." "Silly?" said Robert, very crossly indeed. "How much sillier could you have been, I'd like to know? You nearly settled me, I can tell you." Then he told his story, and the others admitted that it certainly had been rough on him, but they praised his courage and cleverness so much that he presently got back his lost temper, and felt braver than ever, and consented to be captain of the besieged force. "We haven't done anything yet," said Anthea comfortably. "We waited for you. We're going to shoot at them through these little loopholes with the bow and arrows Uncle gave you, and you shall have first shot." "I don't think I would," said Robert cautiously. "You don't know what they're like near to. They've got real bows and arrows, and awful length, and swords and pikes and daggers and all sorts of sharp things. They're all quite real. It's not just a picture or a vision or anything. They can hurt us or kill us even. I shouldn't wonder. I can feel my ear all sore yet. Look here, have you explored the castle? Because I think we'd better let them alone as long as they let us alone. I heard that Jakin man say they weren't going to attack till just before sundown. We can be getting ready for the attack." "Are there any soldiers in the castle to defend it?" "We don't know," said Cyril. "You see, directly I'd wished we were in a besieged castle, everything seemed to go upside down, and when it came straight, we looked out of the window and saw the camp and things, and you, and of course we kept on looking at everything. Isn't this room jolly? It's as real as real." It was. It was square, with stone walls 4 feet thick, and great beams for the ceiling. A low door at the corner led to a flight of steps, up and down. The children went down. They found themselves in a great arched gatehouse. The enormous doors were shut and barred. There was a window in a little room at the bottom of the round turret, up which the stair wound, rather larger than the other windows, and looking through it they saw that the drawbridge was up and the portcullis down. The moat looked very wide and deep. Opposite the great door that led to the moat was another great door with a little door in it. The children went through this and found themselves in a big courtyard, so they were in the gatehouse, if you hadn't remembered that from the original description. The children went through this and found themselves in a big courtyard with the great grey walls of the castle rising dark and heavy on all 4 sides. Near the middle of the courtyard stood Martha, moving her right hand backwards and forwards in the air. The cook was stooping down and moving her hands, also in a very curious way, but the oddest and at the same time most terrible thing was the lamb, who was sitting on nothing, about 3 feet from the ground, laughing happily. So it sounds like the others are with them, but not with them. The children ran towards him. Just as Anthea was reaching out her arms to take him, Martha said crossly, "Let him alone, do, miss, when he is good." "But what is he doing?" said Anthea. "Doing? Why, sitting in his high chair as good as gold, precious, watching me doing of the ironing. Get along with you, do. My iron's cold again." Irons in those days you had to heat up on the stove, the wood or coal-fired stove. You didn't plug them into an electrical power point because they didn't have them in a lot of houses. Electricity was around, but it wasn't commonly in use, I think, at the time of the story. It may not have been around for common use. I don't know. "Get along with you, do. My iron's cold again." She went towards the cook and seemed to poke an invisible fire with an unseen poker. The cook seemed to be putting an unseen dish into an invisible oven. "Run along with you do," she said. "I'm behindhand as it is. You won't get no dinner if you come a-hindering of me like this. Come, off you goes, or I'll pin a dishcloth to some of your tails." "You're sure the lamb's all right?" asked Jane anxiously. "Right as ninepence, if you don't come unsettling him." "I thought you'd like to be rid of him for today, but take him if you want him, for gracious sake." "No, no," they said, and hastened away. They would have to defend the castle presently, and the lamb was safer even suspended in mid-air in an invisible kitchen than in the guard-room of the besieged castle. They went through the first doorway they came to and sat down helplessly on a wooden bench that ran along the room inside. "How awful," said Anthea and Jane together, and Jane added, "I feel as if I was in a lunatic asylum." "What does it mean?" Anthea said. "It's creepy. I don't like it. I wish we'd wished for something plain, a rocking horse or a donkey or something." "It's no use wishing now," said Robert bitterly, and Cyril said, "Do be quiet. I want to think." He buried his face in his hands, and the others looked about them. They were in a long room with an arched roof. There were wooden tables along it, and one across at the end of the room on a sort of raised platform. The room was very dim and dark. The floor was strewn with dry things like sticks, and they did not smell nice. Cyril sat up suddenly and said, "Look here, it's all right. I think it's like this. You know we wished that the servants wouldn't notice any difference when we got the wishes, and nothing happens to the lamb unless we specially wish it to. So of course they don't notice the castle or anything, but then the castle is on the same place where our house is, and the servants have to go on being in the house or else they would notice. But you can't have a castle mixed up with our house, and so we can't see the house because we see the castle, and they can't see the castle because they go on seeing the house. And so—" "Oh, don't," said Jane. "You make my head go all swimmy, like being on a roundabout. It doesn't matter, only I hope we shall be able to see our dinner, that's all, because if it's invisible, it'll be unfeelable as well, and then we can't eat it. I know it will, because I tried to feel if I could feel the lamb's chair, and there was nothing under him at all but air, and we can't eat air, and I feel just as if I hadn't had any breakfast for years and years. It's only been since this morning." "It's no use thinking about it," said Anthea. "Let's go on exploring. Perhaps we might find something to eat." This lighted hope in every breast, and they went on exploring the castle. But though it was the most perfect and delightful castle you can possibly imagine, and furnished in the most complete and beautiful manner, neither food nor men-at-arms were to be found in it. So it's just them. How odd. "If you only thought of wishing to be besieged in a castle thoroughly garrisoned and provisioned," said Jane reproachfully. "You can't think of everything, you know," said Anthea. "I should think it must be nearly dinner time by now." It wasn't. But they hung about watching the strange movements of the servants in the middle of the courtyard, because of course they couldn't be sure where the dining room of the invisible house was. Presently they saw Martha carrying an invisible tray across the courtyard, for it seemed that by the most fortunate accident the dining room of the house and the banqueting hall of the castle were in the same place. But oh, how their hearts sank when they perceived that the tray was invisible. They waited in wretched silence while Martha went through the form of carving an unseen leg of mutton and serving invisible greens and potatoes with a spoon that no one could see. When she had left the room, the children looked at the empty table, then at each other. "This is worse than anything," said Robert, who had not till now been particularly keen on his dinner. "I'm not so very hungry," said Anthea, trying to make the best of things as usual. Cyril tightened his belt ostentatiously. Jane burst into tears. And that's the end of the chapter. So that means, what does it mean? It means I get a drink of water because we're staying hydrated. I'll try and remember to leave the lid off this time so it doesn't make so much noise in the microphone. And a mouthful of coffee. And something to snack on. What have I got today? I have a little bit of last night's coleslaw. That's cabbage with dressing on it. And you probably have to put up with me crunching. Sorry. I'm just having a quick look to see how far through I have to go before the next picture. Oh my goodness. Found one. There was another picture. Here we go. Sorry, itchy nose again. Roman numerals. Sometimes my brain does really interprets them really quickly into Arabic numerals, and sometimes it doesn't. Chapter 7 of 5 Children and It by E. Nesbit. A Siege and Bed. The children were sitting in the gloomy banqueting hall at the end of one of the long, bare wooden tables. There was now no hope. Martha had brought in the dinner, and the dinner was invisible and unfeelable too. For when they rubbed their hands along the table, they knew but too well that for them there was nothing there but table. Suddenly, Cyril felt in his pockets. "Right, oh," he cried, "look here, biscuits!" Somewhat broken and crumbled, certainly, but still biscuits. 3 whole ones and a generous handful of crumbs and fragments. "I forgot them this morning, cook, and I'd quite forgotten." He explained that he divided, I'm not quite sure why he said cook. He explained as he divided them with scrupulous fairness into 4 heaps. They were eaten in a happy silence, though they had an odd taste because they had been in Cyril's pocket all the morning with a hank of tarred twine, some green fir cones, and a ball of cobbler's wax. That would have added an extra element of flavour. "Yes, but look here, Squirrel," said Robert. Squirrel was Cyril. It's the nickname they have for him. "You're so clever at explaining about invisibleness and all that. How is it the biscuits are here and all the bread and meat and things have disappeared?" "I don't know," said Cyril after a pause, "unless it's because we had them. Nothing about us has changed. Everything's in my pocket all right. Then if we had the mutton, it would be real," said Robert. "Oh, don't I wish we could find it?" "But we can't find it. I suppose it isn't ours till we've got it in our mouths." "Or in our pockets," said Jane, thinking of the biscuits. "Who puts mutton in their pockets, goose girl?" said Cyril. "But I know. At any rate, I'll try it." He leaned over the table with his face about an inch from it and kept opening and shutting his mouth as if he were taking bites out of the air. "It's no good," said Robert in deep dejection. "You'll only—" "Hello." Cyril stood up with a grin of triumph, holding a square piece of bread in his mouth. It was quite real. Everyone saw it. It is true that directly he bit a piece off, the rest vanished, but it was all right because he knew he had it. He knew he had it in his hand, though he could not see or feel it. He took another bite from the air between his fingers, and it turned into bread as he bit. The next moment all the others were following his example and opening and shutting their mouths an inch or so from the bare-looking table. Robert captured a slice of mutton but I think I will draw a veil over the rest of this painful scene. It is enough to say that they all had enough mutton, and that when Martha came to change the plates, she said she had never seen such a mess in all her born days. That would be pretty accurate. If you're going around eating things that are invisible, you're going to be pushing it around on the other table, on the other version of the table that you can't see. The pudding was fortunately a plain suet one, and in answer to Martha's questions, the children all with one accord said that they would not have molasses on it, nor jam, nor sugar, Just plain, please, they said. Martha said, well, I never. What next, I wonder? And went away, because usually they ask for anything extra on top that she will put on it, hoping for all the extras. But it would have made quite a mess if they had. Then ensued another scene on which I will not dwell, for nobody looks nice picking up slices of suet pudding from the table in its mouth like a dog. The great thing after all was that they had had dinner, and now everyone felt more courage to prepare for the attack that was to be delivered before sunset. Robert, as captain, insisted on climbing to the top of one of the towers to reconnoitre, so up they all went, and now they could see all round the castle, and could see, too, that beyond the moat on every side, tents of the besieging party were pitched. Rather uncomfortable shivers ran down the children's backs as they saw that all the men were very busy cleaning or sharpening their arms, restringing their bows, and polishing their shields. A large party came along the road, with horses dragging along the great trunk of a tree, and Cyril felt quite pale, because he knew this was for a battering ram. What a good thing we've got a moat, he said, and what a good thing the drawbridge is up. I should never have known how to work it. Of course it would be up in a besieged castle. You'd think there ought to have been soldiers in it, wouldn't you? Said Robert. You see, you don't know how long it's been besieged, said Cyril darkly. Perhaps most of the brave defenders were killed early in the siege and all the provisions eaten, and now there are only a few intrepid survivors, that's us, and we are going to defend it to the death. How do you begin, defending to the death, I mean? Asked Anthea. We ought to be heavily armed, and then shoot at them when they advance to the attack. They used to pour boiling lead down on the besiegers when they got too close, said Anthea. Father showed me the holes on purpose for pouring it down through at Bodiam Castle, and there are holes like it in the gate tower here. I think I'm glad it's only a game. It is only a game, isn't it? Said Jane, but no one answered. The children found plenty of strange weapons in the castle, and if they were armed at all, it was soon plain that they would be, as Cyril said, armed heavily, for these swords and lances and crossbows were far too weighty even for Cyril's manly strength, and as for the longbows, none of the children could even begin to bend them. Yeah, a longbow has a lot of weight on its pull. It was one of the reasons why the English did so well in battles when it was still at the age of using weapons like bows and arrows and spears and swords, was because they had the English longbows, and they also had the Welsh archers, who were very good too. The daggers were better, but Jane hoped that the besiegers would not come close enough for daggers to be of any use. Never mind, we can hurl them like javelins, said Cyril, or drop them on people's heads. I say, there are lots of stones on the other side of the courtyard. If we took some of those up, just to drop on their heads if they were to try swimming the moat. So a heap of stones grew apace up in their room above the gate, and another heap, a shiny, spiking, dangerous-looking heap of daggers and knives. As Anthea was crossing the courtyard for more stones, a sudden and valuable idea came to her. She went to Martha and said, "May we have just biscuits for tea? We're going to play at besieged castles, and we'd like the biscuits to provision the garrison. Put mine in my pocket, please. My hands are so dirty, and I'll tell the others to fetch theirs." This was indeed a happy thought, for now, with 4 generous handfuls of air, which turned to biscuits as Martha crammed it into their pockets, the garrison was well provisioned till sundown. They brought up some iron pots of cold water to pour on the besiegers instead of hot lead, with which the castle did not seem to be provided. The afternoon passed with wonderful quickness. It was very exciting, but none of them, except Robert, could feel all the time that this was really deadly dangerous work. To the others who had only seen the camp and the besiegers, suddenly itchy nose. To others who had only seen the camp and the besiegers from a distance, the whole thing seemed half a game of make-believe, and half a splendidly distinct and perfectly safe dream. But it was only now and then that Robert could feel this. When it seemed to be tea time, the biscuits were eaten, with water from the deep well in the courtyard drunk out of horns. Cyril insisted on putting by 8 of the biscuits in case anyone should feel faint in the stress of battle. Just as he was putting away the reserve biscuits in a sort of little stone cupboard without a door, a sudden sound made him drop 3. It was the loud, fierce cry of a trumpet. "You see, it is real," said Robert, "and they are going to attack." All rushed to the windows. "Yes," said Robert, "they're all coming out of their tents and moving about like ants. There's that Jakin dancing about with the bridge joins on. I wish he could see me put my tongue out at him. Yah!" The others were far too pale to wish to put their tongues out at anybody. They looked at Robert with surprise and respect. Anthea said, "You really are brave, Robert." "Rot." Cyril's pallor turned to redness now, all in a minute. "He's been getting ready to be brave all the afternoon, and I wasn't ready, that's all. I shall be braver than he is in half a jiffy." "Oh dear," said Jane, "what does it matter which of you is the bravest? I think Cyril was a perfect silly to wish for a castle, and I don't want to play." "It isn't," Robert was beginning sternly, but Anthea interrupted. "Oh, yes, you do," she said coaxingly. "It's a very nice game, really, because they can't possibly get in, and if they do, the women and children are always spared by civilized armies." "But are you quite sure they are civilized?" asked Jane, panting. "They seem to be such a long time ago." "Of course they are," said Anthea, pointing cheerfully through the narrow window. "Why, look at the little flags on their lances. How bright they are, and how fine the leader is. Look, that's him, isn't it, Robert, on the grey horse?" Jane consented to look, and the scene was almost too pretty to be alarming. The green turf, the white tents, the flash of pennoned lances, the gleam of armour, and the bright colours of scarf and tunic. It was just like a splendid coloured picture. The trumpets were sounding, and when the trumpeters stopped for breath, the children could hear the cling-clang of armour and the murmur of voices. A trumpeter came forward to the edge of the moat, which now seemed very much narrower than at first, and blew the longest and loudest blast they had yet heard. When the blaring noise had died away, a man who was with the trumpeter shouted, "What ho, within there?" and his voice came plainly to the garrison in the gatehouse. "Hello there," Robert bellowed back. "In the name of our Lord the King, and of our good lord and trusty leader, Sir Wulfric de Talbot, we summon this castle to surrender, on pain of fire and sword, and no quarter. Do ye surrender?" "No," bawled Robert. "Of course we don't." "Never, never, never." The man answered back, "Then your fate be on your own heads." "Cheer," said Robert in a fierce whisper to the others. "Cheer to show them we aren't afraid, and rattle the daggers to make more noise. 1, 2, 3, hip, hip, hooray!" And again, hip, hip, hooray! Once more, hip, hip, hooray! The cheers were rather high and weak, but the rattle of the daggers lent them strength and depth. There was another shout from the camp across the moat, and then the beleaguered fortress felt that the attack had indeed begun. It was getting rather dark in the room above the great gate, and Jane took a very little courage as she remembered that sunset couldn't be far off now. "The moat is dreadfully thin," said Anthea. "But they can't get into the castle even if they do swim over," said Robert, and as he spoke he heard feet on the stair outside, heavy feet and the clang of steel. No one breathed for a moment. The steel and the feet went on up the turret stairs. Then Robert sprang softly to the door. He pulled off his shoes. "Wait here," he whispered, and stole quickly and softly after the boots and the spur clank. He peeped into the upper room. The man was there, and it was Jakin, all dripping with moat water, and he was fiddling about with the machinery which Robert felt sure worked the drawbridge. Robert banged the door suddenly and turned the great key in the lock, just as Jakin sprang to the inside of the door. Then he tore downstairs and into the little turret at the foot of the tower, where the biggest window was. "We ought to have defended this," he cried to the others as they followed him. He was just in time. Another man had swum over and his fingers were on the window ledge. Robert never knew how the man had managed to climb up out of the water, but he saw the clinging fingers and hit them as hard as he could with an iron bar that he caught up from the floor. The man fell with a splash into the moat water. In another moment, Robert was outside the little room, had banged its door and was shooting home the enormous bolts and calling to Cyril to lend a hand. And let's see if I have actually got the next picture set up properly. Yes, I do. There you go. Oops. Hang on. Just get that lining up properly and clicking on the right thing so I can move it so you can see it a little better. So there's the tower. There's the little window that Jakin had climbed in through. And there's the other chap who's just had his fingers hit by the iron rod. Jakin's trying to lower the drawbridge. So they're in the tower that they're in is here, and that's the window. So he must have managed to get his fingers into the gaps in the stones. And I shall set up the next picture, assuming that there's another one before we get to the end of the chapter. Oops, I was meant to turn the view off before you got to see it. Come on. Right. And make sure my phone, sorry, I just realised that I may have some volumes turned on that are interfering with what you're hearing. I hope not. Anyway. The man fell with a splash into the moat water. I had done that. Robert was outside the little room, had banged its door and was shooting home the enormous bolts and calling to Cyril to lend a hand. Then they stood in the arched gatehouse, breathing hard and looking at each other. Jane's mouth was open. "Cheer up, Jenny," said Robert. "It won't last much longer." That's one of her nicknames. There was a creaking above and something rattled and shook. Oh dear. Because Jakin has been shut into the room that has the drawbridge controls. The pavement they stood on seemed to tremble, then a crash told them that the drawbridge had been lowered to its place. "That's that beast Jakin," said Robert. "There's still the portcullis. I'm almost certain that's worked from lower down." And now the drawbridge rang and echoed hollowly to the hooves of horses and the tramp of armed men. "Up, quick!" cried Robert. "Let's drop things on them." Even the girls were feeling almost brave now. They followed Robert quickly and under his directions began to drop stones out through the long, narrow windows. There was a confused noise below and some groans. "Oh dear," said Anthea, putting down the stone she was just going to drop out. "I'm afraid we've hurt somebody." Robert caught up the stone in a fury. "I should hope we had," he said. I'd give something for a jolly good boiling kettle of lead. Surrender indeed." And now came more tramping and a pause, and then the thundering thump of the battering ram, and the little room was almost pitch dark. "We've held it," said Robert. "We won't surrender. The sun must set in a minute. Here, they're all jawing underneath again. Pity there's no time to get more stones. Here, pour the water down on them. It's no good, of course, but they'll hate it." "Oh dear," said Jane. "Don't you think we'd better surrender?" "Never," said Robert. "We'll have a parley if you like, but we'll never surrender. Oh, I'll be a soldier when I grow up. You just see if I don't. I won't go into the civil service, whatever anyone says." "Let's wave a handkerchief and ask for a parley," Jane pleaded. "I don't believe the sun's going to set tonight at all." "Give them the water first, the brutes," said the bloodthirsty Robert. So Anthea tilted the pot over the nearest lead hole and poured. They heard a splash below, but no one below seemed to have felt it. And again the ram battered the great door. Anthea paused. Oh, actually, here you go. There's a picture of her pouring it. There she is, pouring the water from the jug down through the hole that they normally put boiling lead through. And there's the others watching her. Yes. I will actually eventually, hopefully, figure out a faster way of getting these set up for you. How idiotic, said Robert, lying flat on the floor and putting one eye to the lead hole. Of course the hole goes straight down into the gatehouse. That's for when the enemy has got past the door and the portcullis and almost all is lost. Here, hand me the pot. He crawled onto the three-cornered window ledge in the middle of the wall and taking the pot from Anthea, poured the water out through the arrow slit. So obviously she hadn't poured all of it, only some. And as he began to pour, the noise of the battering ram and the trampling of the foe and the shouts of "Surrender!" and "To Talbot forever!" all suddenly stopped and went out like the snuff of a candle. The little dark room seemed to whirl round and turn topsy-turvy, and when the children came to themselves, there they were, safe and sound, in the big front bedroom of their own house, the house with the ornamental nightmare iron top to the roof. They all crowded to the window and looked out. The moat and the tents and the besieging force were all gone, and there was the garden with its tangle of dahlias and marigolds, and asters and later roses, and the spiky iron railings and the quiet white road. Everyone drew a deep breath. "And that's all right," said Robert. "I told you so, and I say we didn't surrender, did we?" "Aren't you glad now I wished for a castle?" asked Cyril. "I think I am now," said Anthea slowly, "but I shouldn't wish for it again, I think, Squirrel dear." "Oh, it was simply splendid," said Jane unexpectedly. "I wasn't frightened a bit." Poor Jane, she was the most frightened. "Oh, I say," said Cyril was beginning, but Anthea stopped him. "Look here," she said, "it's just come into my head. This is the very first thing we've wished for that hasn't got us into a row, and there hasn't been the least little scrap of a row about this. Nobody's raging downstairs. We're safe and sound. We've had an awfully jolly day. At least, not jolly exactly, but you know what I mean. And we know now how brave Robert is, and Cyril too, of course," she added hastily, "and Jane as well, and we haven't got into a row with a single grown-up." The door was opened suddenly and fiercely. "You ought to be ashamed of yourselves," said the voice of Martha, and they could tell by her voice that she was very angry indeed. "I thought you couldn't last through the day without getting up to some mischief. A person can't take a breath of air on the front doorstep, but you must be emptying the water jug on their heads. Off you go to bed, the lot of you, and try to get up better children in the morning. Now then, don't let me have to tell you twice. If I find any of you not in bed in 10 minutes, I'll let you know it. That's all. A new cap and everything." She flounced out amid a disregarded chorus of regrets and apologies. The children were very sorry, but really it was not their faults. You can't help it if you are pouring water on a besieging foe, and your castle suddenly changes into your house, and everything changes with it, except the water, and that happens to fall on somebody else's clean cap. "I don't know why the water didn't change into nothing, though," said Cyril. "Why should it?" asked Robert. "Water's water, all the world over." "I expect the castle well was the same as ours in the stable yard," said Jane, and that was really the case. "I thought we couldn't get through a wish day without a row," said Cyril. "It was much too good to be true. Come on, Bobs, my military hero," that's Robert. "If we lick into bed sharp, she won't be so furious, and perhaps she'll bring us up some supper. I'm jolly hungry. Good night, kids." "Good night. I hope the castle won't come creeping back in the night," said Jane. "Of course it won't," said Anthea briskly. "But Martha will, not in the night, but in a minute. Here, turn round. I'll get that knot out of your pinafore strings." "Wouldn't it have been degrading for Sir Wulfric de Talbot," said Jane dreamily, "if he could have known that half the besieged garrison wore pinafores?" "And the other half knickerbockers. Yes, frightfully. Do stand still. You're only tightening the knot," said Anthea. And that's the end of that chapter and today's reading, because the next chapter is another long one. So, what sort of trouble are they going to get up to? I'll give you a hint. The next chapter is called Bigger Than the Baker's Boy. What are they going to get up to? Oh my goodness, there'll be trouble. There always is. Somehow they'll get into trouble. So just a little bit of storytime housekeeping. If you haven't already, and if you're watching this on Twitch, then if you follow me, Twitch will notify you when I go live. You will need to have joined Twitch and be signed in, but it's free, so that's cool. And you can find other people that you can watch doing other things too. They do gaming, but there's also people who do crafting and cooking and all that sort of stuff. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then if you subscribe and then click the notification bell next to the subscribe button, then YouTube will tell you when I put a new video up. I take the videos that I have recorded when I'm reading live on Twitch, and about 2 weeks later they go into my playlists on YouTube, so that way you won't miss out. So there you go, that's something for you to do as soon as I sign off, which is now.